Apologies, Kay.
I don't have any apologies.
We'll have apologies from Jane, won't we?
Oh yes, sorry Jane, we will.
Yeah, and we caught it. So then, if we can move on to item 4, the patient story, please, Kirsty.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. So hello, I'm Kirsty. Normally we have in this slot a patient story, and today I'd like to bring you the patient story, and I'm going to be sharing the story of Herbert and actually a few other people who have been at the Barnsley NHS vaccination service. So I've had the privilege of being able to work on the COVID vaccination programme here in Barnsley, and so as part of that work, and it actually is a month ago this week, I met Mr. Herbert Barker. Herbert was the first person to receive a COVID vaccine in Barnsley, so as you can imagine there was lots of fanfare, and he was vaccinated by a practice nurse, Fiona. Herbert came down to the Priory campus, so the Priory campus at Lunwood, which is one of our centres there, and he came down a little bit earlier than his appointment so we could have a chat before his vaccine. And actually, as we sat down, and we're in the big main hall in Priory campus, if you've ever been there, and it was really busy. Everybody around us had started arriving early, so there were members of the public waiting for their vaccines arriving in the car park. Some had arrived early because they wanted to plan extra time. There were people who arrived who actually weren't due until later in the day, but they just wanted a dry run. So they'd come all the way over to Priory campus and were doing a dry run to see what would happen. And I think then there was lots of people outside just waiting expectantly. Definitely a sense of excitement in the air, I think, and expectation. So as Herbert and I sat down to have a chat, all the teams around us were working, getting ready for what actually was a really long day ahead, and are really long days for staff working there. So there was a whole long row of vaccine pods. Each had a vaccinator and somebody with them who was on the computer working on the admin there. There were volunteers across the site, all that had been arranged by Barnsley CVS. So all those people were working like clockwork. There were people in the car park marshalling, there were people inside showing people where to go, taking them through to the waiting areas afterwards. And then there was a reception team there booking people in. And all of this was being overseen by the team at the Barnsley Healthcare Federation. And I think it was very clear, just as I sat down and chatted to Herbert, actually, everything around us just felt like it was seamless, like it had been there, and it was always meant to be a vaccination centre. So clearly a lot of hard work had gone into that. And one of the things that really struck me, that there were staff there from across the NHS, from all different professions, from different GP practices, from different NHS organisations across Barnsley. Most of them hadn't met each other before, and literally they just got their heads down, got on with it, and were sort of ready for the day. So I just want to talk to you a bit about Herbert. So Herbert was our first person, as I said, to be vaccinated. And he's a retired haulage contractor, Herbert, and he'd driven over from Wombwell that morning. And as I talked to him, it was very clear he was taking everything in his stride as well. I think if it was me that had been sat there waiting for a vaccine, I might have been a bit nervous, particularly as I was the first person. But it didn't faze Herbert. And I asked him how his year had been for him. And the first thing he said to me, without a beat, was, he said, "Well, I've not been on holiday since March." So that was clearly really important to Herbert, and he told me he liked to go on short coach holidays across the UK. So that was definitely something he's going to be looking forward to doing when we are allowed back out again. And that and going walking, that was another one of his hobbies. And he also gave me a few tips about how to grow veg, because I told him I'd set up an allotment this year during lockdown. So we had a good chat beforehand. And I asked him, I said, what did your family think? And he said, "Oh, well, I'm a great granddad." He said, "So, they're pleased that, all these vaccines are going on." And I said, "What did they think when you told them that you were getting the vaccine, Herbert?" And he said, "Oh, I've not told them." He says, "The first time they'll see it will be in the Chronicle on Friday." And indeed it was. So Herbert was in the Chronicle that particular Friday back in December. He made it into the local papers. We shared his photo with his permission and Fiona's permission on our Facebook page or on social media. And I just want to say a thank you to Herbert and Fiona, because actually sharing it in the newspaper, sharing it on Facebook, we had 7,000 people actively commented on that post of Herbert. So that means they either clicked on something to say I like that, or they shared it, or they commented on it. And because 7,000 people did that on that one post, we can see the stats behind, they then shared it with 23,000 other people, and they clicked on the story. So 23,000 people saw the positive news that the vaccine was here in Barnsley, it was being rolled out, and Herbert and Fiona, the vaccinator, were there sharing that positive news. So I think that's really welcoming, that actually people are so happy to see the vaccine arrive. And of course, you know, there's been thousands of stories just like Herbert's over this past few weeks, and I know colleagues will have been working and volunteering down at the vaccination sites, and I know you'll have all heard some of these stories as well. But I asked a few of the team that had been actually working and vaccinating at those sites what stood out for them, and I'd just like to share a couple of those with you. So here's a couple of stories from people who were marshalling, so volunteers. And I'm going to read these out as clearly as I can, because these are people's personal stories that they fed back. So this one person said, when I was marshalling in the car park at Priory Campus before Christmas, the majority of people I spoke to were so thankful and full of gratitude for everyone's efforts to get to this stage. Some of the people I spoke to hadn't been out far from their home at all since March, and they were actually quite excited to be part of the first cohort. Some said that they felt overwhelmed but privileged, and quite a few of them actually said it was one of the benefits of being over 80 that they were able to get their vaccine. Somebody else told me, they said, from what I've witnessed over the past few days of working at Goldthorpe, the thing that stood out for me is the overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief the people who have been vaccinated feel. We've had some in tears due to them finally being able to get it. And they said, we've even had one lady who, as she was being vaccinated, said, oh, that's lovely. Particularly at Goldthorpe, they said our recovery tent has been a busy place with volunteers providing lots of chat to those that want it. And they've all loved hearing the stories from people, just as much as people, I think, have loved telling them. One patient said it was the best day out they'd had for ages. And although some stories have touched the hearts of volunteers, you know, they've needed a minute afterwards, I think, to sort of collect themselves. But it's all been worthwhile, and they've seen how, you know, perhaps lonely some people are, and they've told, you know, stories of how their family members have passed away, but actually they all leave with a very positive feeling and experience. And then one of the final stories from somebody that's worked there, they said, I've worked at all the clinics, and I just want to say how really well organised it's been. The team have all been amazing, very supportive and welcoming to all the staff. If they've got any queries, they are always answered. The running and the organisation at the sites has been excellent, and this has been mentioned and commended by patients as well, so people are getting some positive feedback there. And I've really enjoyed working with all the amazing nurses and the team, and the most rewarding part is seeing patients' faces so thankful, relieved and excited about having the vaccine, and it makes my job so rewarding. And so I want to leave the final words to Herbert. So once he'd had his vaccine and we were in the waiting area afterwards, I asked him what he would say to other people who might be wondering whether or not to get the vaccine. And he said, well, I think it's something the whole world is trying to be getting a vaccine for. He says, now it's here, why not take it? I'm most looking forward to just getting rid of the virus. So thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. I was going to ask for immediate thoughts and reflections, but I see Chris has his hand up immediately. Chris.
Kirsty, you said an absolutely wonderful word, which was seamless, which brings me back to something called, and some of you might have heard this, no boundaries, seamless care, acting as one team. And there we are demonstrating back to ourselves that we can get rid of all the boundaries. We can make things seamless for people, and we can act as truly as one team. That has really gladdened my heart.
Thank you, Chris. Any other thoughts? I've got a couple of things I want to say. I had my first jab, and I must say the staff were treating people extremely well. There was a happy atmosphere there, which is strange and unusual in a national crisis, which is what this is. I'm not one that usually thanks individuals, but I have seen on the first weekend when the vaccines didn't arrive, then they did arrive. I want to name a couple of people that really helped with the logistical delivery and arrangements, including moving furniture after the wrong furniture was moved in at Apollo Court. And those are our Jamie Wyke, and James Barker from the Federation. And Chris's observations that this is what we've always aspired to, seamless work. It also demonstrates something about relationships and partnerships between all partners, but in particular in delivering the vaccine between the GP Federation and the CCG, and the can-do attitude that people have. So a big thank you to everyone that's been involved. In our practice, I was really moved that every single individual has volunteered, administrative or nursing, to help with the vaccine immediately. If you'd asked me that, I would have said that 80–90% would, but everybody has done it, and I think that's part reflected across other practices as well, and their contributions. So really positive thing. We're doing really well. We have to keep going, and I think we'll get there on this one. And I think the response of the public has been good as well, because people are apprehensive when they go. There's a lot of mixed messages, and there's some scaremongering on social media and elsewhere. But people have gone along, and the people having the vaccines have been part of the sort of successful optimism and enthusiasm that helps the frontline workers do it. Because if everybody turns up and sort of, I'm not having it, but they're having the vaccine and they're supporting the staff. So I think it's a pan-Barnsley effort, and one of the things we should be really proud of. Jamie. Jamie, your hand's up.
It is, but my microphone's on mute, so
Okay.
thank you. So yeah, I was just saying thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's been a lot of hard work done into it, but I went to the site on the first day when Herbert were there, and sort of makes you forget about all of that. So the long days, the late nights, making sure that we'd got the sites designated, that we knew when the vaccines were coming, that we'd worked out how we could get people to all of them sites. When them first vaccines arrived and the first vaccine's done, and you sort of see then that and being up there and seeing particularly the volunteers, so people who were not being paid, they were coming forward. Quite a lot of them were doing it for the first time ever. So spoke to a number of them, and they're doing it for the first time. So I think there is something about the Barnsley partnership being strong. I think there's something in this specific situation about the common cause. So everybody's got one single common purpose, and that is to make sure that Barnsley people get the vaccine as quickly as they can. And I think that just engenders everybody to coming together. But yeah, so to reiterate, it's been a massive achievement. There's still, as we know, a long way to go, isn't there? And we'll touch on it later on the agenda. But everybody played through, and I think they're the quiet ones. They're not in the vaccination buildings, but they're the ones with the yellow coats on outside. Today, in the snow, up at Apollo Court, they've probably got the shovels. They're out at Goldthorpe with the shovels, trying to keep people warm who are coming into the building and leaving the building. And I think they deserve as big a shout as anyone else. So I think we've passed some thanks out to everybody, but the community voluntary sector and the people associated with that have been great. So it's worth recognising that as well, I think. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Any other thoughts or reflections? Okay, so I'll close this with one final thought, and that is that in our battle against COVID, let there be no misunderstanding. We have one thing that will deliver us from COVID, and that's the COVID vaccination. And that's the only thing that will stem the flow of patients to general practice and, of course, to critical care in the hospital. So it's extremely important that we carry on and that we maintain what we're doing and maintain the goodwill of the Barnsley people as well, voluntary sector and all the frontline workers. So thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Chris. At that point, we'll move on, if we can, to item 5, declarations of interest relevant to the agenda. They are as the paper. Are there any new ones anybody wishes to share or update us of? No? Okay, so Kirsty, we ask you once again to describe to us the patient and public involvement activity report, please.
Okay, so a couple of items here that I'd just like to bring to colleagues' attention. So positive news, we have received the rating, the annual rating for how we discharge our statutory duties to involve the public in commissioning. So this year again we've received the highest rating, which is a green star. So I'd just like to note that for the governing body, which is really positive. And then I just wanted to touch on a couple of the current pieces of work that we've got going on, just to raise that profile, I think, with colleagues. So there's quite a lot of work that we're doing with local communities and some patient groups around their experience and insight of health services and their own health during this pandemic. And it's really important that actually we continue to monitor that. So that's something that's slightly different than looking at a particular service. And it's really helpful, and actually what we're doing then is feeding that back into the wider Barnsley system. It's helping forming some of the services that we've got and some of the wider development work that's going on. So it's quite a timely piece of work, but we're able to be quite reactive to some of the insights that we're finding out and then put things into place. And clearly there's some stuff that's coming through, particularly around people's feelings about the impact on their mental health. So some of this is about, you know, how do we plan for that in the future? So things that we're experiencing now that we know will have a much longer lasting impact. So we're starting to collect a lot of that information. And one of those that I wanted to draw your attention to was looking at the use of maternity services from the point of view of somebody who is from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background, and actually how is their experience changed during lockdown of maternity services. So we're doing quite a lot of work with mums and dads to be in Barnsley, and that works really positive. So once we've got those results and that feedback, that will obviously come back through one of these reports, but that's just what I wanted to highlight. So the ask of the governing body is that we can note the positive annual assessment rating and just note the progress of the local activity that we've been doing over the past couple of months.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. And I think, again, I have to say thank you to your team, to everybody involved, to Chris and the Patient Council, to the governing body and to the whole CCG, because, again, public engagement, the quality of that, the meaningfulness of that is very important to us as a CCG, one of our basic values. Chris, you want to come in?
Yeah, in relation to the work that we're doing in maternity and the BME sector, I reported this to South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw lay members, and I got a really, really enthusiastic response to that. So much so that I came straight back to Kirsty and said, Kirsty, can we send all that information to these people, which reinforces yet again the working together. Only one person within the lay member across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw had actually picked up this direction of work. So again, here we are doing something really good. I was quite shocked personally by the figures, but we're doing something really good. but we've actually shared that now across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw lay members. So that was, again, good working together, one team.
Thank you, Chris. Jamie, you've got your hand up. Is that from before or? Okay, thank you.
It was. Apologies, Nick.
It's okay, accepted. Right, moving on. So Kirsty, I think again it's become part of the CCG ethos that we put the public first, put the people first, not just patients, but the whole public. So it's nice that that's what more widely recognised as well, Chris. So congratulations to everybody on achievement of the Green Star. Jamie, your hand's up again. Is it? No? Okay. So thank you for that then. I can't see any other hands up and we'll move on. And well, it's a bit of the Kirsty show today, isn't it, Kirsty? Questions from the public. And we've had
I promise this is the last thing. We have had some questions. Would you like me to read them?
Yes, please.
Okay, lovely. So we've had a number of questions in, and I'm going to read the question and I'll read the response. They've been submitted by members of the Barnsley public for consideration by the CCG governing body. The responses will be read out and we will provide a copy of the answers and put them on our website, and we'll also provide a copy of written answers to the individual that sent in the questions. So question 1, governing body item 12, home first intermediate care model. Please can you say how you will advertise your targeted consultation to people? Please can you say who you will target? So the ongoing engagement will be with people who are using or have recently used the intermediate care service and their carers or family members. They will be contacted by staff working in the service, and this way of engaging service users as part of a new service has been approved by the Barnsley Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So we've shared that approach with them and they're happy for us to move on with that. Question 2, same item, governing body agenda item 12 and 14, integrated care Barnsley Place. So why is there no information for the Barnsley public about Barnsley's integrated care arrangements as in other CCG areas across the SYB ICS? So for colleagues, that's the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw integrated care system. So our response is there is information about each of the place-based partnerships on the integrated care system website, and then there is a link to the website which we will provide, and there are regular updates to the governing body in this particular public session, and similarly to the hospital and to Barnsley Hospital and to South West Yorkshire Partnership Foundation Trust boards. And the Barnsley Integrated Care Partnership Group is not a formal decision-making group. All commissioning decisions are made by the CCG governing body, and that's where those items are discussed. Question 3, governing body item agenda 23, additional documents for the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw integrated care system. And the question is, where are these documents made available for the Barnsley public to access? So these documents are made available on the CCG's governing body agenda papers page on the governing body website, on the CCG website, apologies, and we will provide a link there. And that is the final question.
Thank you. So it's really, thank you for that, and thank you for the responses. I think it's also really helpful and positive that we're now getting, after an absence of 2 or 3 months, some input from the public, and they've found how to access it, and they're taking a supportive interest in what we're doing. So thank you for that, Kirsty. You can have a cup of tea now. And we move on to item 8, minutes of the meeting of the 12th of November, and they're here for clarification and approval. So we'll take those as read. Does anybody have any comments? And if not, are we okay to approve these minutes? Okay, I can't see any hands raised, so we'll approve those minutes. And we'll move on to item 9, the Matters Arising report, where we look at the completed and the outstanding actions. And happy to take now any comments or feedback. and particularly on any outstanding pieces. There are a couple of bits, mental health and bereavement services, that are in the matters arising, and we picked those up, I think, in item 16 of the agenda. Is there anything else on matters arising report? No? Okay, so we can approve those, note those rather. So we move on to item 10, which is the Chief Officer's report, and Chris is in a call. So what
I'm here.
All right, okay, Chris, thank you, just in time. We nearly skipped past you. Chief Officer's report, please, Chris. Good morning.
So just 2 items to flag up to governing body today in the report. The first one is the annual performance assessment of the CCG for 1920. Great news that Barnsley CCG were rated outstanding for the 3rd year running. So absolutely big congratulations to all the GP members, all the staff, all the stakeholders, governing body members. It's the highest rating and puts Barnsley CCG in the top 10% in the country. So fantastic news. In terms of the next part is the Integrating Care Next Steps document. This was published before Christmas. There was a feedback exercise which completed last week. We will expect another document to be issued following the feedback. I'm expecting, probably because of the COVID situation, that may be late January, early February. The document focuses on the future of the NHS and talks about how changes for CCGs potentially evolving into integrated care systems. The positives, I think, in terms of, from my perspective, is the document focuses very much about strong partnership at places and in local areas. It focuses on provider organisations working collaboratively. It talks about developing commissioning through systems with a focus on population health outcomes. And it focuses on the use of digital data to drive system working. So I suggest probably just to receive the report today, but this will be an ongoing discussion at the governing body about how, when we get the final document, how Barnsley as a place and a system will wish to react and to evolve into the new system. So Chair, I'll just pause there and take any questions.
Chris Millington. Muted. You're muted.
Fell into the trap. Good morning, Chris. You've heard this morning, I think you heard anyway, the questions from the public, whereby quite rightly they are seeking to know, they're anxious to know. We've over the last 4 or 5 years been extremely good at telling the general public what we're doing, how we're doing it. And you've already mentioned that we've been rated outstanding as a governing body. So all I would say at this moment in time is that yes, it's an ongoing engagement. It's not, as you pointed out previously, it's not consultation, it's engagement. But as and when this progresses along, I would love for us to be a number one in telling people what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the benefits to be gained from this, because that's what it's all about. It's not about changing things for the sake of changing. It's about getting rid of inequalities and the benefits to be gained from the potential changes that are coming forward.
Thank you, Chris. And I think I don't know if you want to respond to that, Chris.
Just to agree, really. I think this is about improving how we work, and in particular focus on integration across commissioning, provision and all organisations within the NHS. And how we'll integrate more closely with social care is probably something that isn't covered greatly in the document, so that may have come back in the feedback. So I guess that'll be something that will come out in future iterations. But this will be an iterative process, won't it, I guess, and the next step will be for the national leaders to consider the feedback, and I would expect another document to be issued shortly.
And I think the governing body has a further discussion development session on 28th of January, so we can pick up things and what's happened at that point as well. Okay, thank you, Chris. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to item 11, COVID response, and I'm going to put in there, Jamie, a vaccine update as well, please, if you can take us away.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So I've done the COVID response and recovery paper slightly different this month, because I think the sort of recovery updates that we provide have been about service changes and other things, and I think all of the service changes overall that we could have made in response to COVID have happened, and therefore the changes are more about the rates of infection and other things, and they change on a daily basis, and we can see them in the bulletins that are shared out and the other comms. So rather than do that, I thought what I would do today is just share with governing body a couple of updates that we've had in terms of looking forward and planning. So the current asks that are being placed across the health and care system. So I'll come on to that in a sec, and then, as Nick just referred, I'll give an update on the vaccination programme. Everything that I'll go through is included in the report, but just mindful that at the point of writing the report, probably the end of December, and in this fast-moving world, things have shifted. So I'll just try and fill the gaps that have happened between the 31st of December and now, which has been 2 weeks and probably feels like 2 years. So just in terms of the general stuff to start with, I guess it is worth remembering that we still are working in the context of being in a national level 4 incident for the NHS, which means that we are in a sort of national command and control situation. Level 4 means that some of the functions, commissioning functions, other functions are directed by NHS England. So I think we need to be mindful of that in the things that come through the rest of this. So that will continue, and therefore, as set out in 5.2, we have continued with some of our command and control structures, particularly in terms of the partnership coordination structures. So they remain in place, and we continue to make sure that partners together are highlighting the risks that we're facing and try to address them collectively. Just on that, in terms of the plans for Barnsley system, we've previously shared the recovery reset plan, and obviously people are working on that, but we're mindful of the increase in infection. It's probably worth just pointing out, it's not in here because it's happened since, but we had set out and shared with governing body 5 priority areas for the partnership across Barnsley. We have recently sort of recommendation together, I'm not sure if it's gone to the partnership group yet, but to actually include as its own specific priority the vaccination programme, and include that on the sort of partnership strategic risk register as well, to make sure that we are collectively giving oversight and ownership of the vaccination programme, because it's important for us, but it's actually important for Barnsley overall. So I think that's worth noting. So just to move us on, we received on the 23rd of December a letter from Amanda Pritchard and Julian Kelly, which I think was aimed at trying to give a bit of assurance as to what the expectations were through the rest of this year. So I think there's been quite a lot of feedback saying what will we be expected to do between now and the end of the financial year. And on page 3 of my report in section 5.3, I sort of set that out. The letter's in 3 sections, one about the rest of this year. The second one, and the bullet on page 3 I've just spotted is wrong, should say planning for 21-22. I've lost a year somewhere in there, and then the 21-22 financial framework, and then I've just gone on to highlight what they say. So I think in terms of this year, nothing that's a surprise in here, an expectation that across places, but for us, responding to COVID demand, which seems sensible, pulling out all the stops to implement the COVID vaccination programme. I'll come back to that one. Maximising capacity to treat non-COVID patients. So How we do that, looking at different roles. So in primary care, additional roles reimbursement. In secondary care, looking at how we do things different. Continuing to manage and respond to emergency demand and winter pressures. And the final one that's in there is around supporting health and well-being of our workforce. And I think that is a really key point in terms of managing through this next few months, because there's not been any let up. And I think through our partnership discussions, that is extremely apparent. So there's lots of conversations around that. So that's what's asked. There are some priorities as we look forward. So they're set out on page 4 around beginning. And this is obviously reliant on the infection rates beginning to fall away and capacity starting to come back, but recovering non-COVID services. I think it's key that that's done in a way that reduces variation in access. Strengthening the delivery of the local people plans. So again, the workforce, health inequalities is in there. The familiar areas, but very important areas, continuing on the journey to expand and improve mental health services, and to prioritise investment in primary and community services to make sure that we've got improved patient experience, improved access, and we build upon the opportunities that come from use of online consultations and other opportunities to expand the capacity available in primary care. So that's there. And then the final one, which I think just reflects the paper that Chris has just referenced in the Chief Officer's report, is building on the development of effective partnerships, and that's linked into the integrated care world. So I think they're what we would expect. It feels like there's still a lot of big asks in there. So we've been told, manage everything, manage the pressures, manage winter, but as it comes into next year, begin to think about that recovery. And then I don't know whether Roxana, you wanted to just add anything. So the last bit, just before I come on to the second paper, were around the financial framework. So it's there in the report, but I didn't know whether there were anything further to add, Roxana, in terms of how that's expected to work.
So I think we've had, so whilst it sets out that the financial framework for next year in that letter, I think the guidance has kind of slightly moved on. So we've had rumours the last few days that the current financial framework will continue into Q1. Chris Edwards has just shared an email that suggests that that's confirmed. So it looks like the current arrangements that we've got with block contracts with our NHS providers will continue into the next financial year for at least the first quarter. So I think we're in a probably a tricky situation in that sense, because it doesn't set out in the letter what that means in terms of allocations or what those block arrangements would look like yet. So I think we've got lots of guidance still to come, and probably lots of things still to work through from a financial perspective.
Thank you. And just on that, so we're going to say, we got that indication at the end of December. We have had just this morning the operational guidance for regions, and the key bits in there, I guess, just to pull out that supplement what I've said already, is continue to create surge capacity to accept and manage patients with COVID, including ability to provide additional critical care where that's needed. Protect capacity for priority 1 and priority 2 patients. Combine waiting lists across the system, so beginning to work across a wider area to make sure that all of them patients are seen, and then treating patients who are priority 3 and 4 where that demand can be met. And I guess there'll be a push to continue using the independent sector to do that. And then the other thing, and I think this is really important for us, while things remain challenging and difficult decisions need to be made, we must continue to communicate with every patient whose planned care is being disrupted. So making sure that we've got that proper liaison with the patient so that everybody understands what's happening to them on their journey to whatever treatment they need. So they just play into the top of that. So
Jamie,
Chris Millington, I don't know if you've got a question on that.
Who I think are waiting to come in. I think Chris and John, please.
Thank you. The bit I picked up on really, and there's a lot of detail in there, Jamie, I'm sure you appreciate that, but in relation to the planning priorities, it talks about prioritise investment in primary and community care, focusing on improving patient experience, increasing use of online consultations, and expansion of capacity to increase GP appointments, and build on the development of the effective partnership working. That's the bit that me as a lay member, responsible patient, public engagement, or trying to be. The thing the bell that's ringing in my head is telephones. And that might sound very basic, very simple, but we need telephones to get answered to be able to start the process. So I'm not expecting an A to Z outline of exactly what we're doing, but that's the bit I'm really interested in terms of online consultations and increasing capacity.
Okay, thank you, Chris. John?
Yeah, Jamie, in your report, you don't mention as the vaccine, delivery of the vaccine has been requested to be changed from second dose, I'm talking about, from 3 weeks after to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
My concern there is that all the trials that were carried out and approval by MRHA was based on the second injection being given 3 weeks after the first. And the Pfizer have already stuck to their own principles and said it has to be 3 weeks. What's our take on that? Are we following this new guidance, and do we leave ourselves open for patients saying?
Right, Jamie, before you respond to that, I think in terms of the recovery and the operational plan, I think that's one piece of work presented to governing body, and we've received questions on that. Then I think you should give us a COVID vaccination update, which I think in part will answer John's question.
I'll cover that off. Yeah.
So are there any further questions from governing body in public at this moment about the operational plan and the reset and things going forward? Because if there aren't, I would invite Jamie to respond to John, but to essentially give a brief update from the 31st of December or whenever this report was written to today, please.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
I just flagged because we got to 5.4 of the report just touches there's a little bit more in terms of planning, which is about discharge and recovery. I don't think there's anything new there, but I just wanted to flag that letter to governing body as well, so I'll not elaborate on that more. So yeah, in terms of the vaccination programme, so I'll try and cover what's in the report plus bring us up to date. So the government published their vaccination plan this week, which included details of the range of delivery models that they're putting in place across the country to vaccinate the whole population at a pace that is quite ambitious. Within that included large-scale vaccination sites, so 7 of them across the country, moving to approximately 50 over the next few weeks. We've not got one of them sites in South Yorkshire yet. Some of our patients are being invited because they're within the, I think it's 45-minute travelling distance of the Manchester site. So some of our patients who are on the west side and of the borough are being invited there and can, if they wish, choose to book into that vaccination site. They also, of course, can choose to wait until they're called into something that's more local. So that's the first site. There's then hospital hubs. So hospital hubs, initially, we'd got a small number at large teaching hospitals where the Pfizer vaccine were being delivered. And that was because of storage and the frozen nature of it. Now that there's a better supply of the Pfizer vaccine and it can be delivered in a defrosted method, it can be delivered to many more of the hospitals. And I think most hospitals are now receiving vaccination and are set up as hospital hubs. So last week there was some guidance around vaccination of frontline health and care workers, with an expectation that hospital hubs take the lead on delivering vaccination to the wider health and care workforce. So hospital hubs to deliver to their workforce, but also linking in with social care partners and others to deliver those. Obviously, I'll come on to primary care in a second, but the primary care hubs will continue to deliver some of the health and care workforce at care homes and obviously the primary care staff. So the expectation at the moment is that the health and care workforce, frontline health and care workforce, receive their first vaccination by the end of this month, and that is a reasonable expectation, I think, based on the flow of vaccine that is coming in. So that's hospital hubs. Then there is the PCN community hubs. So in Barnsley, we've got 3 sites. All 3 sites are now running. They are at Priory Campus, Apollo Court and the Goldthorpe Lift Building. They operate strictly on an appointment-only basis. I think that's really important in terms of managing flow. So still, Kirsty's been amazing with the comms, but so have the other teams in terms of waiting and people being called in. All of our GP practices are supporting by identifying the appropriate and priority cohorts, which is sort of 80 plus at the moment, hopefully moving down that list, but calling them in, booking, and they're coming and being seen. And we've talked about the massive effort of the team in terms of partnerships coming together, staffing them sites up, and there's not been any issues really going through them sites. Challenges with supply coming at certain times and other things, but actually it's been there when we've expected to be set up, and the delivery has been great. So over the first few weeks, delivered a significant number of vaccine and made big inroads into that 80 plus population. I've set out in the report just to indicate the pace that things move through sometimes, but I'll not go through that. So I think just to bring up to date, as John just indicated, and to answer that question, on the 30th of December, they confirmed the second vaccine. So I think that's a real positive for us. So that is in the report. At the same time as they confirmed that, they confirmed some changes to the way that things operate across both vaccines that are currently approved. So one of the things that was that were changed was who could access the vaccine. So it reduced some of the restrictions around at-risk groups, people who were suffering from had suffered from allergies and things. So more people vaccinated, and there is an opportunity to vaccinate people who are pregnant, but taking account of risk. The second, and I think more significant change, was the move from 3 weeks to 12 weeks. So the rationale for that is that the first dose of the vaccine gives a level of protection, a significant level of protection for the population. The second obviously increases that, but given the supply of vaccine coming into the country, the continued increases in infection rate, the priority must be to get as many people with a level of protection as possible, as quickly as possible. And that is part of the rationale behind the change. In terms of the evidence, I'm not a scientist, but Chris and Chris Edwards and myself had to join a call on Sunday evening, and on that call was Simon Stevens, Chris Whitty, Professor John Van Tam, and a number of other people who we will have all seen standing beside Boris Johnson over this last sort of few months, and who are the evidence guys behind the change. And they were absolutely confident in the decision that the chief medical officers had made. They gave information around looking into all of the stuff. And whilst, yes, the original guidance was 3 weeks, they were confident that during the trials, there'd been enough testing of vaccination at different spacing that it was viable. So I think we can dig into it and we can look at the evidence. However, I think there were a key message coming from that call, and I'll take you back to the beginning of my report where I noted that we remain in a national incident and therefore under level 4 national command and control, and it was that second doses should not be done at 3 week. They need to be done at 12 week to maximise the protection of as big a cohort of our population as possible to make sure that we have a positive impact on this virus. And that was not guidance or an ask of the system. It was played to us as an instruction. So I think in answer to the question as to whether we would follow that line, the answer has to be yes, we will. We will work with that. We will be providing. So as a CCG, our stance has to be that we would be working with the primary care network and with our practices on that basis. There have been one or two, or probably a few more second doses than that because they've been booked in and other things. But from yesterday, all patients will be first dose patients until we get to the point where people need to come back, probably at 10 to 12 weeks for their second dose. So that's the position, and that's where we're at.
Thank you, Jamie. Can I just come in to make that absolutely clear? So the first thing is, while it may not have been in the original expression of the evidence, there is ongoing modelling and ongoing testing of the efficacy of the vaccine. And we're told by the government and national scientific advisors that the second dose can be given up to 12 weeks. So I think we have to accept that. I think the second really important thing that Jamie mentioned there, this is not an ask, it's a level 4 and it's an instruction. Therefore, this is what we must do. And I don't think it's really debatable from that perspective. As doctors, as scientists, we would always look at the evidence, look at the research, but actually other people have done that for us on our behalf. So this is an instruction, and therefore we have to take it in confidence and in good faith that this is the best thing for our population, and that's what we have to do. And so the focus now is on widening the first dose administration.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. Carry on.
No, it's all right. I think that's right. And so just to bring us up to speed with where we're currently at then. So I've referenced the hospital hubs coming on stream. So the hospital hub in Barnsley, we've got an hub at Barnsley Hospital. There's also some vaccines coming into Kendry Hospital via SWIFT, which is to enable the community workforce to be vaccinated out there. The majority of the hospital workforce will have received their first vaccine by the end of this week. And then the hospital hub will be able to start to vaccinate that wider workforce group. So optometrists, dentists, social care workers and others. So that's where we're at with that. The AstraZeneca vaccine has started to flow to us, not in any massive numbers as yet, but it is coming. So we're still getting regular supplies of Pfizer. So this week, two deliveries to this week, 2 deliveries to each of the site. Next week, 2 deliveries to each of the site, meaning that them sites will be running 6 days a week, at least for the next couple of weeks, but for the foreseeable. The AstraZeneca vaccine has meant that we've been able to ramp up in terms of care homes. And it's probably worth just pointing out, we received a letter last night. So the ambition for care homes had been shared to try to vaccinate and get the first dose of vaccine to all care home residents and staff by the end of January. There's a push to bring that forward as far as possible. And a letter went out last night and has gone to all practices to ask that wherever possible, all residents in care homes are vaccinated by the 24th, which is a week on Sunday. The government are supporting that in recognising that there may be additional costs to do that so quickly and to get out into the care homes, support consent and everything else. So there's payment to practices to support that additional cost and that sort of staggers. So if we can do things in this week, which will need some urgent work, a level of payment. If we can do things next week, it reduces slightly, and so on. But that is an opportunity, and we will hopefully also be able to commence providing some of that vaccine out to enable practices with the community teams and others to get out to their housebound patients, because up to now that's one of the cohorts who we've not been able to get out and vaccinate just because of the ability to move the vaccine. So I think that's the next step. And then just in terms of key dates and just where we're at and what we're working towards with our partners, health and care staff by the end of January, care homes all completed wherever possible by the 24th of January, and I think that's reasonable and is possible with the supply that's coming in. And for the over 70s and the clinically extremely vulnerable population to be vaccinated with their first dose by the end of February. So that is a significant ask, but if we keep up the effort, if we keep the sites running and the vaccine supply continues, there should be no reason why together we can't do that. So I would probably end there. So I think that's a positive assurance that we will meet the expectations that are being placed on us.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Chris, you had your hand up, and I think
just a thank you to everybody for the work so far. It has been amazing what's been achieved in such a short time. The one thing Jamie did pick up was about resilience of staff, and just picking up around Boris Johnson, our leader, has been talked about, you know, vaccinating well into the autumn. I think was that the time period was being used. So there's a recognition, I think, that primary care staff will, obviously there will be resilience issues. So that, nationally, they're talking about 80,000 volunteers, St John's Ambulance being able to access additional workforce. So I've inquired how Barnsley would access, and that's being managed through the Sheffield Teaching Hospital Workforce Hub. So I've put in a request, and they're going to contact the national team, see if there's a way that Barnsley can access additional workforce during the vaccination programme. So that's just something to bear in mind, but it is probably my biggest concern about resilience of staff, because it's going to be a long haul, this vaccination programme.
Yeah.
On the back of that, I think there's something about what primary care does, being both an on-the-day sort of urgent care service in some ways, or what people perceive as urgent, and focus of work, diversion of effort onto mass vaccination, and we're managing that as well. John, did you want to come in?
I think Jamie answered it. The advantage and the restriction is going to be the supply of AstraZeneca vaccine. There's a new guidance on AstraZeneca vaccine is patients don't have to wait 15 minutes after the injection. That should increase the numbers going through the clinic. However, it will all depend on how much vaccine you've got.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So are there any other contributions that people wish to make? Okay, so thank you to everyone for that. I think we're in a good place, but as John has said, as Chris has said, we have to be mindful of what helps us with the logistics and the delivery, distribution and the actual administration, and supporting all parts of the system, and of course accepting all the help we can get from the voluntary sector and the community. So thank you for that. So we've noted the phase 3 recovery update, the operational plan, and we've had a comprehensive vaccine update. So thank you for that, Jamie. Thank you, everybody. Can we move on to item 12, please? Lucy, a new model for intermediate care.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So
Morning.
this paper outlines a new model for intermediate care, and it's been developed in collaboration with our health and social care partners. We're proposing to implement it from the 1st of June 21, and today we're asking governing body to approve the model, the service specifications and the discharge to assess pathways. So intermediate care services provide support for a short period of time to help people recover and increase their independence by an active form of reablement. And the vision for the new model is a strengthened home first offer, so more people are cared for in their normal place of residence, so their home where possible. So currently the services can support up to 120 people at one time. So that would be 50 in care homes and 70 in their own homes. And the proposed changes are that the service supports the same number of people, but more in their home and fewer in a care home or intermediate care facility. So that would be a minimum of 90 in their own homes and 30 in a care home for rehabilitation. And we're proposing that one care home site will be used for this, and it will become a specialist unit. So the new model's been developed by reviewing national best practice, including what other areas have developed with reported positive outcomes. We've looked at clinical information for past and present service users, and from a quality point of view, patients report improved outcomes when they receive rehabilitation and reablement in their own homes compared to institutional settings. From a financial point of view, the pathways will be re-provisioned within the same cost envelope. And we've developed 3 specifications to reflect the proposed model. So the first one is for overarching intermediate care, and that's a refresh of the current spec, which highlights changes to the new model, and it's been brought up to date in terms of local and national developments like primary care networks and neighbourhood teams here in Barnsley. The second spec is for the 30-bedded unit, and that reflects the proposal for the beds to be situated on one site. It's felt that one site would be more efficient in terms of staff time and resource, and it'd enable the unit to focus on rehabilitation and hopefully become a centre of excellence. So in order to check that that was feasible, we did a market testing exercise in September last year, which identified 7 care home providers and 5 of those who had Barnsley bases who articulated an interest in the opportunity. So we do think that that's feasible. The new 30-bedded unit would be staffed by nurses and therapists, which would be CQC registered with Barnsley Hospital. And although that brings benefits of having nurses on site from a safer staffing perspective, it's felt that a GP ward round would continue to be required as it is now, with on-call provision including out of hours to support those patients. And that's articulated in the 3rd specification for medical oversight. So in addition to this, in November last year, the CCG's medicine management team started a pilot of community pharmacy support to the intermediate care bed base, and that was to help re-able patients from a medication perspective. The pilot's due to be evaluated by the end of this month in order to see if there's efficiencies in terms of the place system, medication usage and admissions and readmissions to hospital. Early indications are that it's been successful and would therefore continue to be provided in the new model, but that evaluation will go to clinical forum when it's available for review there. So in terms of engagement, we've worked with partners, and also we've had independent advice from the Consultation Institute to consider how service users and their carers can be engaged with in a meaningful way, whilst acknowledging the difficulties of safely accessing this vulnerable group of people during the pandemic. And especially, we didn't want to put any additional pressure on the frontline workforce. So we agreed an approach which has been signed off by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Health Watch to mobilise the project and ensure the service specification is outcomes based, with a dedicated process to scrutinise and review changes on a regular basis from a patient and carer experience point of view. So that'll enable us to understand how the service feels to those who are in receipt of it, and flex it and adapt it where that's required. So we're proposing to mobilise data capture as soon as possible to kind of influence service delivery. And we've got an offer of support from patient council members to help us develop information for service user groups. So interlinking to intermediate care is discharge to assess, and the intermediate care teams would continue to work hand in hand with discharge teams to ensure patients have the right support when they leave acute settings. So we've learned some lessons through the pandemic and the discharge to assess pathways, and I think that's shown really that people with complex needs can be cared for in a safe way in the community. And modelling for both the work streams have had input from partners, and the discharge to assess pathways are included in the papers. So today we're asking governing body to approve the new Home First model for intermediate care, approve the 3 specifications and approve the pathways for discharge to assess. Did anyone have any questions?
Lucy, first of all, I'll bring Chris in a second, but thank you for you and your team and Jane and others that have contributed to this. I know it's been to management team a few times, I think, and it's been to clinical forum twice, and I think it's been adapted and amended periodically. So this is the sort of final draft. Comprehensive and detailed piece of work. So thank you for that. Chris, would you like to come in?
Yes, I would actually. Lucy, just to reiterate what Dr. Balash just said, in a massive amount of work. And I, as a lay member, thank you for that. Bearing in mind we are now in public, I just want to reiterate and confirm that the presentation that you gave to patient council for me went down exceptionally well. There was absolutely 100% support behind what you were doing, Lucy, and the team, and Jane Sivakumar, our chief nurse. In relation to the 30-bed unit, it's not always, well, it's not all about beds, is it? It's also about not forgetting the excellent work that was achieved in the Acorn ward in getting people back on their feet and back home. As and when we achieved the 90-30, 90 people at home in their own safe homes and 30 people in this dedicated facility, that's going to be a real benefit for the people of Barnsley. I'm looking forward now to actually seeing who was going to take this up and deliver this service for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are you saying something, Lucy?
Sorry, I just said thank you, Chris.
Okay, here you are. So I think we'll move to approving this. There is one thing that I've alluded to before, and I think we need to be very clear on, though, and that is the medical oversight. And if that is going out, the procurement to potential primary care bidders, that there's absolute separation in terms of any input that's gone into the modelling and the procurement process. And I mentioned that before, and that's just for the confidence of the public in that. So I think at this point, are we agreeing to approve the new First Home spec, the model, the 3 service specs, and the discharge to assess pathway? Are we all happy to approve those? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy, and our thanks to you and your team, and of course to Jane. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. So now we move on to, I think it's the cancer assurance report. And is Siobhan with us to do this, or are you doing it?
No, I'm doing it, Nick.
Okay, thanks for saying. Nice to hear you.
Yeah, hello, Nick. Good morning, all. The papers is about giving assurance to the governing body about the cancer program position. Just to recap, as the governing body and CCG, we've been asked to restore the amount to at least the pre-pandemic levels, to reduce the number of people waiting longer than they should, and to ensure there's a sufficient capacity to manage the demand in future. In addition to this, we also need to restore the number of people coming forward appropriately to ensure there's a sufficient diagnostics in COVID-safe environments, and to expand surgical hubs to meet the demand that we need, and also to try and increase the endoscopy to normal levels, and restart all cancer screening programs, to reduce the referral to treatment waits, 31, 62, and 104 days, and also to put in place any actions that need to support any groups as well. Now I'm going to tell you how we are doing this by focusing on the priority restoration areas, which would like to bring to the governing body's attention. Also, we're providing an update on the endoscopy activity restoration since the paper was written. The first areas I'll cover are focus on delivering the rapid diagnostic pathway components across the lower GI, lung, and wake symptom pathways. As you know, COVID has had an impact on these pathways delivery and the early diagnosis within the 28 days. We are now working as a system to get this back on track and consider 60% of this pathway are on track at this time. We are also intending to increase the awareness of these pathways at the BEST meeting to be held next week, especially the importance of completing the referral forms with all the necessary information, because many of the forms are not fully completed, which is impacting the speed at which the diagnosis can occur, especially at this time when the number of pathways are prolonged due to the COVID situation. We are also bringing in additional resources to focus on meeting the 28 days faster diagnosis, and the assurance will be via the Rapid Diagnostic Community Oversight Group. The assurance I can give you is today is that we intend to have the optimal GI pathways and wake symptoms meeting 28 days faster diagnosis by April. At this stage, I would like to give you an update on the endoscopy lower GI pathway and how we are ensuring patient care is prioritized. The trust is taking steps to ensure it prioritizes referrals for cancer. The teams have implemented straight to test slots, and despite an unexpected surge in the lower GI referrals, we are looking to meet the waiting times and fill all the available capacity. They also have endoscopy sessions at Claremont, and these are closely monitored, and also to increase the number of slots available on site as well. We have reduced the long waits, and most are down to patient's choice rather than the trust inability to manage the situation. It's come down from 90 to 18. All have had a review and are contacted regularly to discuss their conditions and offered appointments. Some patients are prolonging the treatment due to COVID and are waiting for to have their vaccinations. So all services, including your primary care, are talking to patients about the impact and this on their treatment, etc. To address the issues, we're also using targeted activities to ensure people come forward, managing the risk in the primary care with the robust safety netting, minimizing the harm. Clinical prioritization is ensuring that patients are told if their symptoms changes to contact the GP or the hospital. We are innovatively outlined the starting behavior in site nudge work that will be directly targeting those who are not coming forward or delaying treatment. But immediately we'll continue to distribute numerous communications by variety of methods to tackle this issue. There is also the continuing risks that the changing position of CB is COVID-19 across the country, and that possibility could be a further step down in endoscopy activity because staff can be moved to support the colleagues in the critical care capacity, but the trust will only do this as a last resort. COVID-19 has significantly reduced capacity. The new guidance is in place in services and reduced isolation periods for patients, but will not return to previous level of activity whilst these guidelines remain in place. I do acknowledge that patients are waiting too long and want to return to pre-COVID-19 performance. Please be assured we are taking all the possible actions to achieve this. Secondly, we are continuing to clinically prioritize and review patients who have been referred or waiting for treatment to ensure that the risks to their long-term health outcomes are minimized. There is a program in place that is about clinical prioritizing anyone who is waiting, including having regular clinical reviews to make sure people are prioritized for care based on need, including if it's impacting on their quality of life. Working with the Cancer Alliance and the Trust to fully maximize the efficiency of the capacity that is available and the restorations to pre-COVID referral and capacity levels. Working with the Trust and the Cancer Alliance, a weekly state report is in place that tells us where is capacity, make sure that all capacity is available, including using the independent sector. The referrals are regularly prioritized, offering flexibility with appointment, triaging, offering remote consultations, etc. We're also introducing the clinical decision-making tool into the primary care over the next few months to help reduce variations and to try and restore referrals that have dropped to pre-COVID level compared and targeted inequalities. So I would like to assure the governing body that the cancer program is managing this in the best way that it can, but please note that remains some risk regarding the lower GI pathway, endoscopy, etc. We are aiming to mitigate the risk by including FIT as an exclusion in primary care initiated tool. This will decrease by 40% referrals and colonoscopy and the time people are waiting. We are working with the primary care network and Barnsley-wide integrated delivery system, focusing on restoring early diagnosis, referrals, and targeting tumor and screening pathways that have been affected by COVID. Over the last 6 months, a number of screening programs were impacted by COVID. At the time, cervical screening has had a minimal impact on the pathway and is restarted in June, and bowel is restarted in early September. The last screening service to restart was the breast, and this began in mid-September. This has the greatest restoration risks as the current breast screening services due to COVID conditions only able to operate at a 40% capacity. The current resources, the Trust and the Public Health England, whom are all commissioning the services, are aware of this risk, and this will impact on the phase 3 restorations for a significant period. To mitigate the risks, a number of actions are in place. The Trust has raised the risk with the Public Health of England and requested support to increase the capacity. Public Health England are prioritizing the outstanding screening waiting list based on the clinical prioritization to minimize the risks of harm to women during this period. The Public Health England are developing a process of inviting women for screening based on length of time since their last test rather than the current round invitation system. This will reduce the time women are waiting to call for an appointment. Trust also have developed an internal business case for a mobile screening unit proposal. Staffing the provision of this would be a challenge and the funding is required. Trust has shared their mobile provision business case with the Public Health of England and are upskilling 2 staff to provide the sustainability and additional capacity into the service to reduce the backlog. CCG has raised with the Public Health England the risk the situation poses to early diagnosis of breast cancer and women's survival and the morbidity outcomes. It is also working with the primary care network to increase screening rates to groups that are low attendees and encouraging women to present to services if they have any suspicious symptoms. The risk, though, is not impacting on the symptomatic breast pathway, as screening is not part of this pathway. So the conclusion is the CCG is meeting the governing body assurance framework cancer priorities and phase 3 cancer restoration delivery. This also provides a framework upon which the PCN and Barnsley Integrated Delivery Group can base their mobilization and priority planning decision upon. Planning decisions upon. The governing body is therefore asked to approve this assurance report. Thank you.
Hussein. Thank you for a very comprehensive assurance report. Do we have any questions for Dr. Gadasha? No? Okay, so we can accept that as assurance. Thank you, Hussein. And with that, we'll move on. Thank you to item 14. Jeremy, Integrated Care in Barnsley Assurance Report.
Thank you, Nick. So again, this is for governing body to note and for assurance. It's in response to our overall governing body assurance framework. It's in the order that this comes to governing body today. So it's a routine assurance report for you. So I'll take it as read, but I'll pick out some points within this. In terms of 5.1, the introduction, just want to stress again just how the pandemic and the difficulties that's brought us has really continued to bring Barnsley Health and Care together to work in a really coordinated and strong way across Barnsley. And you'll have seen that through the vaccination report that Jamie put forward earlier. That's just the most recent example of that work. So I just want to bring that to governing body's attention, as I think it's really important that we see that. And the partnership groups are meeting on a regular basis. The delivery group meets each week. Partnership group meets each month, and we've got the Health and Wellbeing Board back in action as well now, and I think somewhat reinvigorated as well. And a real focus on mental health there, which is really good to see. In terms of covering off then the items that are on the risk register, so we've got our out-of-hospital care, primary care networks, and obviously governing body is aware that we have our neighbourhood teams mobilisation. We were well underway with that and would have completed phase 1 of that mobilisation by the end of last March. Of course, events intervened to slow that down, but it should be noted that it hasn't stopped. So although the overall mobilisation hasn't carried on in the full way that we would have been assuring ourselves as commissioners that it has done, we have nonetheless seen great work across primary and community care. And I think just recognise again just the huge input from staff to just deliver what they need to do on a day-by-day basis. And again, I'd also echo at this point, we just need to be really careful and mindful of staff wellness at this point as well, and make sure we are doing all we can to minimise pressures on them. The neighbourhood team mobilisation board met once last September when things were slightly calmer, and we were just on the point of restarting that mobilisation. Of course, we had to put that on hold again as the second wave came along. Just in the process of changing the focus of that from just straightforward mobilisation to obviously having that on the agenda, but really focusing on what we continue to do together to deliver better outcomes for the people of Barnsley. So the focus is changing to a care closer to home group that's just met just once for an hour last week. Obviously with operational pressures, the membership who were able to attend that last week was somewhat limited, but our intention is to really expand that membership out to get representation from the PCN, obviously from the CCG and from other partners, Swift and the local authority in particular and the hospital also have to come on board as and when we have areas of work where we have clear overlap. So I think that's really important, because that's going to be the vehicle through which we push our health inequalities and population health findings, and make sure that those integrated teams in the community are able to respond to that, also feed into that process as well. 5.3, we have made some progress in terms of that integrated provider governance and shared leadership out of hospital. So EHF and SWIFT have been working and developing a local partnership agreement that will strengthen governance and strengthen that shared leadership in a very operational way. And that again is building on top of the neighbourhood teams work that we put in place, and of course our primary care network, which has huge strengths and has, with the vaccination again, really risen to the challenge over the last few weeks with all the primary care. On 5.4, population health and management, want to drive that through clinical forum within the CCG, but also with the Care Closer to Home group. Had initial conversations as well with our new medical director, who's really keen to be involved in the health inequalities of that. Of course, Natalie is the lead clinical representative for the CCG within that. Worth noting that we've got a really strong intelligence cell, and which is supported by the partnership across health and care. So an example of that, for instance, is that we have BMBC funded senior population health analyst who's just been appointed, and we'll work within that. So that's an additional resource for us all to help us identify and produce the evidence to support where we want to focus our efforts as commissioners and providers over the next few months and years. That really flows into 5.5, which is on health inequalities as well. With some clear expectations set out for us in the phase 3 letter, which governing body has seen before, and you've seen our initial system recover and reset plan, which we brought here in full at previous meetings, and which we'll refresh in the light of the phase 4 letter. And I think we'll probably want to bring that back in March. Nick, probably has note that, and make sure we have a refresh of that in place. We've also been working hard on our place-based workforce strategy. Been aware that we had a really good piece of work undertaken. Again, we got grant funding to work with an outside agency that have developed a strong analytical model to allow us to look at clinical functions and what clinical functions we would need to have in the future. So we had a workforce strategy based on that. That's been picked up now by South Yorkshire Ambassador ICS, and the whole ICS is now rolling that model forward. We're just going to look at a second iteration of that in Barnsley over the next couple of months. And into that we can pull things like the additional workforce that the PCN will be receiving as well, to make sure we try to work as one system to maximise the benefits to us all from those new roles. Also worth noting in there that we have a Health Education England place-based workforce lead who we've just reappointed, so that's additional capacity for the CCG and for the system to move that work forward. On the states, by this time this year, had COVID not been in place, we would have refreshed our primary care estate strategy. We would have worked as one system through the Strategic Estates Group to create a Barnsley estate strategy, which would have been linking through both to the workforce digital and to the integration strategy that governing body has previously looked at. Obviously, we had to put some of that on hold, but we have the funding in place to allow us to move forward on the primary care estate strategy, and we're just considering how we layer on top of that a wider piece of a state strategy work as well. So I've got some proposals which I'm looking at now, and I'll obviously update governing body as and when we move forward further with that. And we've also got opportunities to build on the bid that we put into the ICS primary care estates funding, the 57 million that was released by the government in it was Chris, when was it? Early 2019, I forget. It seems like a long time ago. And which you and colleagues were working hard on. The ICS for the last few months. So we got an opportunity there to potentially access some funding which might become available from that in the spring, and we're looking at a project in Yellowthorpe in the Durham, and just starting to work through some options there, focusing on frailty diagnostics, virtual outpatients, and a range of other things. And again, just putting together some initial options around that, and that will need to come to clinical forum for input here. We've had some input from the PCN clinical directors and from other partners as well. I'd like to bring that back for a fuller discussion within the CCG in the near future. In terms of integrated commissioning, we are working with the local authority, really keen to align our commissioning plans where we can. We've had a couple of workshops with the joint commissioning group, which is primarily staffed now by BMBC. We'd like to work on a life course approach, starting well, living well and aging well, and we're just putting in place 3 task and finish groups to look at those areas and agree and recommend where we think, by working together in a different way, much more closely from the start, we can add additionality and deliver better outcomes for the people of Barnsley. And again, I'd like to bring back an update on that in March. And we're just at the point where we want to start to engage clinically within the CCG to make sure clinical commissioners are fully on board with that thinking. It's quite early days on that at the moment. And then 5.9, Jamie covered off in the earlier paper. That's the reset plan and the 5 priorities. Again, just to note, and we've discussed this at the Integrated Care Delivery Group, but it hasn't gone any further than that. But we do think we've got 5 priorities everybody signed off on. I think we probably would recommend that we have a 6th priority, which is the vaccination campaign. It is so fundamental to all our plans together for the people of Barnsley over the next few months. So in terms of principal threats to delivery in 5.10, well, the principal threat is really that although we're working together very constructively in a day-by-day operational way, we have limited capacity across the board really to think about future transformation and change. Hopefully that will change in the next few months. And then in terms of the next steps, I've listed a few there. These again shouldn't be a surprise to governing body because we looked at these previously when we considered the phase 3 reset of arrangements. So report is there for information and assurance, and Nick, over to you for questions. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think there's one other thing in there in terms of place, and that's that the Health and Wellbeing Board that you alluded to earlier, the development, and you said it's getting to a better place with the mental health partnership. We're inviting the Integrated Care Partnership Group to meet with the Health and Wellbeing Board with some, as you probably know, the invites have just gone out, with some local government association support to look at how we can work together and make the best value of the Barnsley pound. So some coming together of the wider Health and Wellbeing Board elements with the Integrated Care Partnership Group, and that will be sometime at the end of March, I think. So that's another support to our integration. Are there any, so thank you, Jeremy. Are there any questions for Jeremy? Okay, so thanks for that, Jeremy. And I think the governing body is assured, and we'll move on. Could I just ask governing body members now, in terms of presenting their reports, a lot of this is for assurance and information. Therefore, people will have questions based on their reading of it. So if anybody is presenting these assurance and information reports, can we get to the main items that they want to get across? Because we would want to preserve some time for those things the governing body needs to formally approve. And I think we've got quite a lot of updates on this, so if we could get through those reasonably, as Tony Pedder from the Health Oversight Board would say, crisply. Okay, so no pressure. Patrick, maternity assurance report.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
You'll have to speak up a bit, Patrick.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, thank you.
So I'll try to be as clear and concise as I can.
As reasonably clear and concise as you can. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So obviously I'll take the paper as read. I think to note is that good progress is being made in Barnsley to implement the recommendations of the Better Births, and the paper does give brief update in relation to each of those 7 areas of the recommendations of that document. Of keynote really is the continuity of carer model, and the national target being that we have to achieve 31% by the end of March. That will be comfortably achieved in Barnsley. And also of note in that respect is that the continued carer model in Barnsley is seen as exemplar, and they are providing leadership and support to other trusts within the region to sort of mirror the success that we're having in Barnsley. A significant impact of the current pandemic is a significant increase in referrals to the specialist maternal mental health midwife. And I think that probably is an expected consequence and impact. Referrals into the specialist mental health midwife have probably increased about 70%, but she is managing to provide support both telephone and video consultation. Linked to that, in relation to maternal mental health, the South Yorkshire Basset Law ICS local maternity service, local maternity system, have also recently submitted a bid to become an early implementer of the maternal mental outreach clinics. The bid has been successful, and our model is based on the Sheffield model, which has psychology support actually based directly within the maternity division and the maternity department. So that's, I think, a good thing going forward, because now within Barnsley, not only will we have the specialist mental health midwife, we'll have the maternity outreach clinics, we have referrals, priority referrals into IAPT, and we also have the specialist perinatal mental health service as well. So that's good enhanced support there, but there's still work to be done. Very recently, about 6 weeks ago, there was the first report of the independent review into maternity services at Shrewsbury, known as the Ockenden report, that was published, and this has highlighted a number of safety issues within maternity services. So not only were there numerous actions for the local service to undertake, but there were immediate actions for all trusts within the England to actually undertake as well. And Barnsley had to submit a letter of compliance to the actions which I've outlined in the paper that were undertaken. So that letter was sent. And what I think is positive is that Barnsley weren't too far away from already having embedded most of those things that were highlighted within the report. So it's in a good position to be in. So I think just in conclusion, really, Barnsley Maternity Services do provide a good, safe and quality service for the population of Barnsley.
Thanks, Patrick. That's all very positive, isn't it? That's quite refreshing. Any questions for Patrick? Chris Edwards?
Yeah, so just thanks, Patrick. That's excellent. I'm actually the Senior Responsible Officer for Maternity Services for South Yorkshire and Basset Law. And actually, Barnsley does stand out as being an exemplar in terms of maternity service, and has done for some years. I just wanted to, Patrick, I don't know if you're aware that Laura Rumsey, who's the head of midwifery at Barnsley Hospital, is also been appointed the lead midwife for South Yorkshire and be leading on the local maternity and neonatal system. So Barnsley will be offering clinical leadership to the whole of South Yorkshire in terms of midwifery.
So I wasn't aware, Chris, but I think that's a fantastic appointment. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or anything Patrick can help us with on this item? No, mumbled a bit there, sorry. So no further questions. Okay, thanks very much, Patrick. Thank you for that. Very positive. Can we move on to item 16, suicide prevention and bereavement support update? I think this says information. I think it's largely for assurance though, isn't it? Because questions brought by governing body. So we've got Mark and Patrick, please.
Okay, I'll kick off, Mark, if that's all right. So I think of keynote is that the Barnsley Public Health team lead on both the local suicide plans, but also on the South Yorkshire and Basset Law suicide plans. And a significant amount of investment has been put into the real-time surveillance system that we've now got in place. And it's probably good to note that perhaps only about 40% of the country have access to the real-time surveillance system, but it does provide some rich intelligence and understanding of some of the sort of reasons why and sort of some of the circumstances that might lead to someone taking their own life. I think quite starkly, I think there in probably the first few lines is there's a number of deaths that we've had in Barnsley in 2020, which is around 41, which, as you can see from previous years, it's 27 last year and 20 the year before. So there is a suggestion, I suppose, that may be as an impact of the current pandemic, although that's not borne out by sort of the national information that's going through. What it's suggesting is that suicides have not increased in relation to the pandemic, but there are some areas in which it has, and I think Barnsley may be one of those areas. So the use of the real-time surveillance system does provide us with, we're notified within 48 hours of someone potentially taking their own life, and that enables immediate support to be provided for those families who have been bereaved by suicide. And it also helps us to identify whether there's any clusters. So, for example, we did have in Barnsley about 18 months ago a cluster of young people. So it does enable us to identify whether those clusters are and to really target the support at particular areas. It also helps to identify themes, and what's been established in Barnsley are known as suspected suicide learning panels. And this is a connection of partners who come together to look at the details behind some of the people who have taken their own lives. And what the themes it's identified is that there are deaths, particularly within men, is increasing, but that's not the usual sort of 40 age range, but it is throughout the ages. So we're seeing a number of older people taking their life, particularly men, but it is men generally throughout the life course. There's also evidence to suggest that people are successful in taking their life, have tried at least one attempt previously, and that there is some evidence that a number of people have either substance misuse issues, but also those people who have had suffering physical pain or have a long-term condition. So those are factors that we need to really be targeting and be trying to understand. There are a number of services that have been put into place, particularly with the local authority and SWIFT. So they've looked at an attempted suicide follow-up service, and this has been developed with NHS winter pressures funding that we have been bid for and been successful. And it's a pilot to look at how we can best support people and follow up their families once we know that they're suffering from bereavement in this way. And so it helps us. Well, one of the indicators that we're aware of is that where people have been impacted by suicide, they are at some point more likely to try to attempt to take their own lives as well. So it's trying to put that support in very early on to try to prevent any further action being taken in that respect. There is also trying to understand better the reasons why people may take their own life. So there's a suicide and self-harm task group which has been established, which includes South Yorkshire Police and YAS, etc. Just to try to understand better the reasons and the rationales as to why people may well take their own life, and therefore try to put that support in early enough. As you can see, there's a buddy scheme that's been developed by Creative Minds, which is a charity hosted by SWIFT. And again, it's trying to get people, I think one of the key things is to prevent suicide prevention is simply talking. So it's trying to get people to talk to one another, not only with friends and families, but also with people, strangers you may see in the street if you see that they're distressed, etc. So there's lots of work that's going in relation to that, but also just not talking, but looking at perhaps art therapy and other types of therapy that might make people have better well-being and emotional well-being. Because, as I've mentioned, in Barnsley, there is a particular issue in relation to men taking their own lives. There's also been work linked in with at Barnsley Football Club, which is called Team Talk. As you said, it's a low-level mental health support, but it is important because it is about men trying to open up and talk about issues in a relaxed and supportive sort of environment. Because, as we know, men are not particularly good at talking about how they feel. So this is really trying to encourage men in from all walks of life to try to get together and just talk about how they're feeling and to make them feel better. So there are various sessions there, and because it's linked in with football, it's much more acceptable for men, and it's not seen as them not being able to cope, etc. I've mentioned about the art therapy, which is sort of Things to Live, which again is creative recovery, but is linked into Creative Minds. And as you probably should be aware, we have for 2 years in relation with the local authority run the hashtag #AllRightPal campaign. This was the brainwave of Phil Ainsworth, who is one of the Barnsley Public Health mental health leads. And again, it is just talking about, I was trying to get people to talk about it. So the All Right Pal, wherever you see the sign, within barbers shops, it was in sports areas, etc. Just trying to get people just to talk. As we've seen, that is one of the main things around preventing suicides. We can see from the paper that Chili Pep have actually delivered quite a significant amount of training courses to a wide range of people. So I know we know Chili Pep has a young person sort of charity, but actually they do provide training to people of all ages, and the report there outlines how that training has been targeted. In terms of bereavement support, I think it has been generally acknowledged that, particularly for children and young people, it is lacking within the Barnsley Borough. but it is something that's been identified and we are looking towards improving that. That said, in relation to bereavement support, there is the Listening Ear South Yorkshire Bereavement Service, which is a telephone helpline, and it was set up initially really to help people who have been bereaved within the pandemic, because they can't, they were restricted in what they could do or couldn't do, so the normal sort of outlets weren't available. So that was set up initially for that, but has expanded to not just people who've lost people in due to COVID, etc., but it's for anyone who's lost someone. And that is a local service which Barnsley people are accessing, although it does seem from the figures that Barnsley figures that people do not access it as widely as the other areas of South Yorkshire. So that's something that we need to take note of as well. There is the Amparo Suicide Bereavement Service as well, and that has just been consented for another 2 years. And again, it provides support to both one-to-one or family groups and groups of colleagues, which again is limited within the pandemic, but they will continue throughout, providing consultation through telephones and videos as well, but they will get back to face-to-face support as soon as they can. And then there's the Barnsley Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide service, which does support people. It's a self-help organisation which does try to provide that safe, confidential environment in which people can share their experiences. So again, it's all about talking and sharing, which is important, but I think it's something that perhaps we don't do easily. I mentioned that there was a lack of support for people who've bereaved, for children and young people. So BNBC have very recently secured a small pot of funding, and they've just gone out to tender to provide to find a provider for a 12-month pilot, specifically supporting children and young people and families who have been recently bereaved. So I'll provide an update on that, on how that service is going as we move forward. And that's it from me, Nick.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mark or for Patrick?
Can I just say I'm wondering how well some of this is publicised, because I was surprised at how much was going on that I wasn't really aware of.
Yeah, my point.
I'm not sure how, particularly the bereavement side, some of those things I've not heard of. And the other thing, I suppose, it's perhaps not really a surprise if more deprived areas suffer the impact of COVID more than some others, if they're already living on the edge with deprivation and financial worries, that COVID might be more likely to push areas like that over the edge.
Yeah. Jamie McGuinness. Jamie McGuinness.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to just microphone. I suppose it's a point I've raised with the children's mental health services that we could do with a clearer map of services available, so that both members of the public and professionals know what services are accessible to everybody. Because we have this problem with the pediatrics, with adult mental health. There's several services that we simply haven't heard of, and so therefore they don't get the same access. The Listening Ear, I knew about because I was in a meeting at the start of the pandemic, but I've never heard of it since. So I've referred people into it, but I did suspect that it wasn't going to be used by Barnsley residents because nobody's aware of it.
This is my point. This came for information, and there was quite a lot of things there that I didn't know about. And we deal with these things every single day, don't we, in primary care? So that's why I felt it was, for me, although the paper says information, it was assuring when I looked at the range of services. One of the couple of points that from that I think are important, and I'll take the privilege of being chair is sharing. I think the first one is what's been picked up by Jamie and Mark is signposting to services from primary care. I think that's something that we really need to look at. I don't know who would pick that up, Kay. You could leave it as an action, if Mark doesn't mind, to pick up in terms of how do we support families when they come to us. They may not go into formal mental health services, but bereavement support, people who don't want to be referred, a range of things. We wouldn't know where to send people. And in fact, we probably only have a minimal understanding of the services they provide. So a bit more information to primary care and signposting, please. This, and Mark, if you could pick that up and let us know how that develops. The second thing that struck me, it might be a modelling thing, and it's the attempted suicide follow-up service. So we've got some winter pressures money and some other monies, and Swift have put that in. I actually think that should be a part of the model of the single point of access and mental health access team. It should be part of their routine pathway. And I think we should do a bit of work with Swift and with others to make sure that that's not just something that happens while these monies are here, but that they can assure us in future that attempted suicide follow-up, if there is an evidence-based intervention, then that should become not ad hoc based on winter monies, but part of the routine contracting that we have for mental health services to deliver. So I don't know who would pick that up with Swift.
I'll pick that up, Nick.
Would you? Yeah, so that it's something, if there's an evidence-based intervention, if it really helps, then we want it all the time, routine, for people who fall into that category.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Patrick and Mark. Are there any other questions or comments people want to make? No? Okay, thank you for that. We'll then move on to item 17, Quality Highlights Report, and we welcome Jo Harrison to share that with us. Thanks, Jo.
Good morning, Chair and members. First of all, I'll apologise if I'm able to answer only limited questions on the highlight report, as it's not my general area of expertise. However, I'll do my best. I'm presuming that you've all read the highlight report. Would you like me to just go through it section by section and give a little brief overview?
Yeah, briefly, please.
Yep.
Yeah. You're among friends, don't worry.
Barnsley Hospital management of the Opal 4 position. We rated that as green at the last Quality and Patient Safety Committee for the amount of work that's been done and the position that was held by the Acute Hospital Trust throughout an Opal 4 position, when there was obviously many pressures regarding coronavirus and winter pressures. We've been assured on several fronts through the command and control in bronze, silver and gold, and also daily sit reps, and we felt that that was the position that they held was excellent given the pressures that were had. And I think what in some of the areas what that's demonstrated is the excellent partnership working as well. Is there anything further you'd like me to say on that?
No. Carry on.
Okay. The next item was minimising harm due to COVID. As part of the ICS initiative, there's a group focusing on minimising harm, and I know we have a couple of key people who are involved in certain key projects that I know of, but there was certain cohorts of patients that were identified, particularly those who are currently on elective waiting lists and have been waiting for some time. I think from the information that I've looked at, things like hip and knee surgery were high and long waiters, but people were receiving treatment during those waiting times. And I think some of that was around the availability of the injections as well, the steroid injections. So, but the position's been held and people are receiving treatment. There are people who've been on elective waiting lists but have been removed from lists and referred back to primary care without their procedures having been carried out. So that cohort was being monitored. And the next one, patients who've been seen in primary care but where a referral into secondary care has not been achieved due to services or lists being closed during the coronavirus restrictions, or they've been unavailable to new referrals. And then the management of new referrals by GPs and alternatives to referrals. There was a report to the Quality and Patient Safety Committee on this work stream, and it was rated at green. There was a lot of content and a lot of progress described within the report, and particularly the Cancer Alliance harm minimisation principles. I'm aware there's been an awful lot of work done on that, so I think that's to be particularly noted. The next slide.
Make a point on that on bullet point 3. Yep. Patients who've been seen but where referral in secondary care has not been achieved. There's a piece of work at the ICS led by Des Breen, who's looking at, particularly in the early days of COVID, where there was an inconsistency between providers and within providers across departments as to how they managed referrals, from some saying we're not having referrals, refer when COVID's over, and from others saying there's some advice here, follow that. And he's taken back some feedback, and as far as I understand, he's looking at that, but the risk, from my understanding, is far less than was originally thought. And the risk was perhaps higher at the beginning of the COVID period, when people were sort of confused, hadn't had time to get systems in place to deal with this question. But I do believe that that's been addressed and the risk is comparatively small. Jeremy?
Thanks, Chris. I just want to make a point just for governing body to note that the harm initiative came from Barnsley into the Cancer Alliance. We put resource into the Cancer Alliance, went down very well and got adopted across the whole Cancer Alliance. And from there led to the RCS harm initiative led by Des Green. So just to note that the source of it was here.
Well, it all sounded very familiar to me when I was talking to Des, but I'd lost where it came from. Thank you. Okay, Joe, please carry on.
Okay, to move on to the next item. This is an item that I do have some knowledge and expertise. I've seen as I'm the local area contact for the Learning Disability Mortality Reviews, the LEADER programme. We reported to QPSC on the update on the positive progress on completing outstanding LEADER reviews. We were at a pretty poor position at the beginning of last year with 52 outstanding reviews. Some of those had been given over to a North East Commissioning Support Unit to do, but we had a number in the teens to complete ourselves of what was called a backlog of reviews. We received some non-recurrent funding at the beginning of last year from NHS England and appointed a reviewer within the CCG. That's not a position that we can sustain, as that obviously was non-recurrent funding. So going forward, we're taking a different approach. But I'm pleased to report, and was pleased to report to QPSC, that we were on track for completing those reviews, and we did actually hand all our reviews in by 31st of December, which was our deadline.
Thank you.
There was, and obviously that was rated green, and the next item was around CCG's policy. There were two policies approved by Quality and Patient Safety Committee. They were the Safeguarding People policy and the Information Security policy.
Thank you.
And I believe those are here for final approval. The next item was rated red at the last Quality and Patient Safety Committee, and this is another area where I'm involved. It's in the locked rehabilitation provision, and I reported to QPSC that there's work progressing within the CCG to improve the approach regarding the access to out-of-area locked rehabilitation beds. This is a particular pressure on the devolved budget within SWIFT at the moment, where we have a small cohort of young women particularly who are presenting a particular cost pressure, but a system pressure in that they are not achieving good outcomes at all in locked rehab, and those services are not I wouldn't say failing them, but they're not producing the right approaches, and we've had some of them had to be moved into out-of-area psychiatric inpatient intensive care beds. So there's particular pressures around the outcomes for these young people and young women particularly, but there are other people coming through the system, and also this relates to looked after children, because a number of them were looked after children, so we're needing to look at transitions programmes coming through and how CAMS are supporting people. So there's a piece of work ongoing to understand and explore that, and we feel that that will culminate in some kind of borough-wide discussion with key stakeholders and partners around all the issues around looked after children and through the system, and then into the services that we commission locally, so that we can maybe not have to go out of area. We're also discussing those at our commissioning priorities meetings with SWIFT.
Okay, thank you. When would we receive assurance on that, given that it's red? Is that a 3-month thing? Is it a big piece of work?
It's I think, Chair, it's a particularly ongoing and longer piece of work, but in terms of understanding what we need to do, I'm sure that we can get something together in the next 3 months. We really do feel there's some pressure to understand this and know what we need to do in terms of commission intentions going forwards.
Okay, so it might be useful to bring something back to the March governing body if possible, just as an update.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions for Joe? Can't see any hands up. Okay, thank you, Joe. Could you then take us, I understand you're taking item 18 as well, covert administration of medicines policy.
Yes, this was a policy that we've co-authored with the medicines management team, and it's really around assurance to governing body that we're complying with the Mental Capacity Act and other legal frameworks around human rights. This relates to people who lack capacity to consent and comply with the medication regimes, particularly in care homes, who need that medication to sustain life and well-being in some cases, and are refusing it, where we take decisions in best interest to administer that medication without their knowledge. It's very different to administering medication in a vehicle such as food with somebody's knowledge and consent, because they can't take medication very well orally. But this is around people who are declining.
Okay, so my question to thank you for that. So taking the paper as read, my question to governing body is, do we feel comfortable with this policy in terms of covert administration? I do, because it talks about best interest meetings and it distinguishes between deprivation of liberties and things like that. So I think a lot of work's gone into this, and I would feel comfortable to approve it, but I would be very keen to hear from anybody who thought differently or had any other comment to make. Right, I'm not seeing any hands go up or anything, so our ask today, I think it's quite an important one, this, in terms of deprivation of liberties and what we do as a profession and responsibilities of prescriber and how quickly we can get best interest meetings together and things. But our ask today is to approve this. Do we feel comfortable to approve it? Yeah. Okay, so we can approve that. Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair and members. I'll leave you now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye then.
Can we then move on to 19, please, Richard, Risk and Governance Section Report.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. In the interest of crispness, I'll try to focus on the key things. So you've got, as usual, the assurance framework and also an extract from the risk register of the red risks that we've currently got on there, of which there are 9, I believe. That's there as always for your assurance and also for any comments or questions that anybody may have. In terms of sort of changes to that since the last time you saw them, well, on the risk register, we have now, through the Finance and Performance Committee and also the Quality and Patient Safety Committee, we've added in a risk around CHC and the recovery plan for CHC. That's in the pack if people want to see that, and governing body will be receiving some more information around that at a forthcoming development session. And we have hang on, sorry, I'm just finding my place in my pack. Yeah, so the other thing that's that sort of changed since last time is that there's been a minor change to a score agreed by the Equality and Engagement Committee on the engagement risk in the risk register, but that was just a small tweak which I'm just asking governing body to note. There's also at the finance, and this is not in the paper, so I apologise for that. At Finance and Performance Committee last Thursday, there was a couple of changes agreed both to the assurance framework and the risk register, which, because of timing of papers and so on, didn't make its way into the papers for this meeting. So if I can just explain that, because our financial forecasts are now indicating with a fair degree of confidence that we will meet our financial sort of statutory targets this year, Finance and Performance Committee felt it was appropriate to reduce both the score on the risk register relating to delivery of financial targets down to a 3/4, which is 12, and they also felt it was appropriate on the assurance framework to reduce the score in relation to 6.1, which is around financial balance and efficiency, also down to 3/4 equals 12. So there are two changes that, as I said, we didn't include in the paper, and apologies for that, but I'm asking governing body to approve that if possible. So that's the assurance framework and risk register. The only other thing in my paper was around the Equality and Engagement Committee terms of reference, which were subject to review, as all of our terms of reference are on an annual basis at the meeting a few weeks ago. And the only change, again, that I wanted governing body to note and approve was in the membership. The vice chair of that committee was previously noted as the deputy chief nurse, but actually it's the chief. Jane has now become the chief nurse, so we've changed the vice chair to the chief nurse, and we have added the deputy chief nurse as an additional member to that committee. So it's just a relatively small change to the membership there that governing bodies asked to note. So so that was all I was gonna say. Happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Richard. I've got, first of all, is there any questions or comments or queries anyone wants to put to Richard? Okay, I've got a couple of things, Richard. I think the first one is the flu risk, which is set at 20.
Yeah.
And I wondered if, given that we're in January, and of course some of the flu illness may have been subsumed into COVID-type presentations,
yeah,
whether that risk could safely be reduced. It doesn't feel like a 20 to me.
Yeah, I wonder if Jamie, do you have a view on that?
So yeah, I think I would support that. I mean, in terms of the flu vaccination programme, we'll be coming to the end of it anyway. There's some finalisation of the programme, but there were a risk in there around the availability of the vaccine and things early on, which is what got us there, because we were increasing the size of the cohorts and things. But actually, the supply was there, and I think practices have been able to get through that. So we're towards the end of the programme. Uptake has been higher than it's ever been in Barnsley and in all of the cohorts, and the level of flu being reported is lower than it's ever been. So yeah, I think we can reduce that. So if you want me to take that as an action to review that with colleagues, and we'll update that for next time.
Yeah, thank you. And the second thing is the CHC scoring on the risk register of 12.
Yeah.
My feeling is that it's higher than that. But what I would suggest is, as we've got a development session on that, we could perhaps get more information and review it at that point. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, doesn't it?
Okay, Roxana?
Sorry, Nick, just to come in on that point, Finance and Performance Committee did discuss that and said that once we'd seen the assurance report, we would then reassess the risk score, because we all felt that it should have been higher as well. So just to note that.
Right, thank you. So I missed finance performance. That's good. Okay, so when are we going to review it then? Are we waiting for an assurance report on that, and what will the timescale be? Will we have that for the development session?
Yes, it's programmed in for the 28th of January, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can leave that till then. So okay, do you want to take us through the ask then, Richard, please? And we'll
Yeah, happy to do that, Nick. So so I suppose first thing is, and it's not actually in the paper, that thing about approving the change to the scores on the assurance framework and the risk register relating to the financial the delivery of financial targets. So that's an ask to approve. We're asking the governing body to review and the assurance framework and risk register. Note that we've added in the new risk in relation to CHC, and as we've just said, we can take an action to look at that again after the development session. We're asking governing body to consider whether all risks are being appropriately managed. to identify if any potential new risks should be added on. But again, given comments, I don't think we've got any to add on there. And then it's just to note and approve the changes to the Equality Engagement Committee terms of reference. So if governing body's happy to proceed on that basis, that would be good.
Specifically with the action for Jamie to look at flu, and 28th of Jan look at CHC.
Yeah.
Is anybody happy with that? Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Richard.
No problem.
And then I think we've got item 20, which is you again, Richard, the home working policy.
Yeah, that's right. So this is here for governing body approval because our governance says that where we have a new policy, it comes to governing body for sign off. But just to be absolutely clear, we already have a flexible working policy, and which sets out a range of different flexible working options that staff can request, and home working is one of those elements within the flexible working policy. But given what's happened over the last 9 months or so, with people, many more people than was previously the case, having to work from home for the time being, and the expectation that for some people at least that might continue to be something that they would want to think about going forward, we felt it was timely to introduce a policy specifically around home working, so that we've got a more robust framework than we had before to consider any requests that we might get, and you know, the arrangements that we might need to put in place around that, really. So the policy that you've got has been drafted for us by our HR team. It's broadly consistent with policies that we've got, I think, in other CCGs in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw. It's been through a sort of fairly rigorous engagement process already. So SMT, staff side, and a number of other forums have been asked to comment, and the draft that you've got in front of you today reflects all of the comments that we've had. My personal view is that whilst any request for home working, of course, has to be treated on its merits and has to be consistent with business need and all that, there is, you know, there are potential benefits to the CCG in terms of having this policy and making this offer to our staff, and I've set those out in the covering paper. So, you know, I'm commending it to governing body for approval. Obviously, if anybody has any comments or questions, happy to take them.
Chris Millington, you put your hand up.
The extra assurance I was seeking, Richard's already covered. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I have one. The advantages of home working and where we are. So I fully support the policy, but I think we should be mindful of some disadvantages of home working. And these are to the individual and to the organisation, and they're not listed, and they don't need to be, but I think we should be mindful of them. The one is that there is something about face-to-face meetings and brainstorming, and something that Jamie and I have discussed, and that's cross-fertilisation of ideas informally, because a lot of these meetings are quite formal and they don't have all the nuances of face-to-face. And in my work, certainly in any transformational work, developmental work, I just want to pass this by you. The door's always open. That's something that we get less of here. And that, I think, is a small risk to the organisation. So whilst home working is good, there are some things that face-to-face and coming in. And also when you come into an environment, you do get peer support. And this is where I'm just thinking a little bit about the individual home working. And I perceive that for some individuals, and perhaps a little bit for all of us, and I'm thinking perhaps about those people who would be outside Hilda House quite a bit and just come in perhaps on 1 or 2 days a week, there is, I think, an increased risk of professional and perhaps a bit of social isolation. So I think those are probably things that people, when approving for particular individuals in the CCG, go through that process, they just need to bear in mind. So those are my comments, but happy to approve the policy.
Okay.
Everyone else happy to approve the policy? Okay, so that's done. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. We now move on to item 21, integrated performance report. I'm going to ask you, Roxana, just to go over the financial position, given that we've heard from finance and performance and amended some risks, to update on the financial part of that, please.
Yep, thank you, Nick. So just briefly then, I'll take the report as read. So it does at the moment look like the CCG is on track to deliver financial duties, and we will achieve a break-even position, subject of course to national funding in relation to hospital discharge programme. There are also a few other areas that remain a risk in the financial position, particularly around the independent sector and the activity that's been undertaken there, because nationally they recognise that some of the activity would fluctuate during the latter part of the year, and therefore they've set up a regime whereby they would do a reconciliation. That for Barnsley was it was based on month 1 to 4 activity, and that would potentially mean that Barnsley sees a defund. We did know about this during the planning process, so budgets were set aside for the national defund that would come. So it's probably not going to pose too much of a significant risk, but I just wanted to flag it to the governing body. There is also some risk around prescribing. So where we were in the top-up regime for month 1 to 6, nationally they recognise that they may come back and review the prescribing actual position. They've not actually said yet what the protocol and process will be around that yet, but that for Barnsley again would represent a defund of around about 300,000. I think the issue across other CCGs across our patch and across the rest of the country is much more significant than it is to Barnsley. I think we put in a fairly robust forecast position as at month 6, whereas others had kind of got much significantly higher positions. I think they'd assumed continuation of some of the start of the year pressures in their positions. So I think nationally there will be some sort of defund programme to claw back some of that funding that had been given. So that again is just for the committee, the governing body to note. We are working with the PCN to maximise our additional role reimbursement, and to obviously ensure that we can claim the full value that's available to Barnsley, both locally and nationally. And that will continue through particularly supporting the vaccination programme now, because some of the rules around roles and types of roles have been flexed to allow support to the vaccination programme. So that should again provide some additional capacity to the system. In terms of efficiency, I'm yet to catch up with Chris Lawson, particularly around the impact of the vaccination programme around the prescribing quip. So the position that currently stands is the position that was agreed with Chris Lawson, our head of medicines management, last month, and that includes a 960k efficiency delivery that potentially could be at risk depending on what the schemes are and who is undertaking the work. So that's just for the governing body to note at this point, and I'll provide a full update next month in terms of any impact of that. In terms of CHC, we are continuing to see some pressures coming through from CHC. So again, once governing body have had the assurance report at the end of January, we should be able to assess what the position on that looks like. And other projects that we had as part of our efficiency programme essentially have been met through underspending budgets. And therefore we do expect that isn't going to cause any sort of significant risk to the CCG. Included in the report is also details of the CCG's COVID expenditure, and in the appendix the governing body will see that at the moment it's showing that we will have approximately a 502k underspend on our COVID allocations. That again will be used to support both any shortfalls in funding around vaccinations, as long as we can meet the national criteria around COVID costs, then we will ensure that we kind of maximising the use of that resource within the CCG as best we can. There is a paper going through to SMT and Primary Care Commissioning Committee next week on the use of some other national funding that the CCG have received around pulse oximetry, primary care resilience, and that's expected to release again additional funding into primary care to support the vaccination programme. So that kind of covers the main summarised points really of the report, and I will take any questions.
Thank you. John? John, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, Roxanne, I understand the COVID cost, but I understand also that the primary care laptops that we had purchased were given to the clinics that are doing the COVID vaccinations, and therefore has left us with none left to give back to practices.
Yeah. So we have ordered some more, Dr. Harbour, and a big order went in. So there should be some laptops on their way if they've not already arrived. So we did immediately restock some of our break fix laptops to be able to allow some rollout of some kit into primary care.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think they have arrived, and I've been told that they're going to take a long time. So I'm just thinking we've left ourselves open that when we lose staff at primary care, I'm in the position, it's not conflict of interest in that may probably have to close down a site because I've got staff missing. So
I think Jamie's going to come in with the response to that.
Jamie?
Yeah, thanks. So there is some delay just because I think there's a massive demand for laptops. So the orders have gone in exactly as Roxana says. It's taking some time. I think we get to make a balanced decision around what to do with the stock. And we've actually used stock that were in the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw IT stock that may not have been necessarily intended to play out to Barnsley initially to get to them sites, but we wanted to make sure the vaccination sites had access to the systems that allowed them to play through. So, that does leave us with a balance. What we are aware of is that, and maybe not in your individual practice, John, but in some practices, kit has been played out that might not yet be being fully utilised, and we may be using or have kit out there. So I've asked Julie if she can try to work with IT to identify where there may be some flexibilities around kit that's being deployed into practices to enable home working that's not been required as yet, because we might just need to have to to manage it through to do some switching about. If we've got somebody working on a laptop in a GP practice when there's a fixed desktop at the side of them, we need to do a bit of flexibility. So we just need to try and look at what the stock is, where it is, and how we can move it, because it's absolutely a real problem, particularly given last week reintroducing shielding, and a number of practices may have lost staff members. But there were quite a lot of kit played out in terms of the Surface Pros and others. So, I guess there's an ask out to all of our colleagues that where that did get played out, it is being used to support those people who need to be working remotely and at home. And I think in the main it is, but there is some that's probably still spare.
Yeah, I would strongly support that, Jamie, because I think there are bits of equipment. For example, if you take somebody who was shielding from home because they were pregnant, they then were working from home, but then they will go into a period of maternity leave. So there are some, have they still got a kit at home? So that there will be some bits of kit around in the system that are not being used. That's just one example for various things. Yeah. And I think a quick thing round to practice managers could perhaps yield some kit that we could share. I think there's a bit in the system because a lot did come out. So we'll try and get John sorted.
No, I'm not saying get me sorted. I'm just thinking we've not planned ahead, and we've given all the kit out, and that's left us no spare capacity at all. And now we're waiting for stocks to arrive, and we don't know how long they're going to take. I mean, I only have one laptop which I use at home, and I agree with Jamie, and I raised the point at the time. Why are we giving laptops into practices when they've got PCs on their table, because most practices all have PCs in their rooms. So I'm just highlighting that because I have a funny, strange feeling with all this going off and more shielding, that there's going to be, as you say, Nick, more practices that are going to be in that position. And then do we really want to close sites? Well, we've just talked about maintaining primary care services in the community and access to primary care services.
Okay, so Jamie, you've got Jamie? No.
Yeah, it's just up from before, Nick.
Yeah,
so that's
okay.
fine. So I will progress that with Julie to try and get out to identify where that is and think about how we're using the kit flexibly.
Yeah, that's great. I do notice that Roxana referred to John as Dr. Harmon, which I think Leslie used to do when she was annoyed with him.
I just ignored it, Nick.
I know. Okay, can we move on to the performance part of this report, please? Thank you, Roxana. Thank you.
Thanks.
Jamie, performance.
Sorry. Yeah. Let me just get to there. So I think the performance report from a performance perspective is fairly consistent with what we've been reporting for the last few months. We remain in the middle of the pandemic, and all providers are working very hard to manage within that, but it does have an impact in terms of delivery of some of the national standards. So particularly those where there's a need to sort of measure waiting times and other things. So just looking at the report that's attached, you will see there that we continue to see pressures across planned care in terms of referral to treatment times, and that is there'd been some improvement, but it is starting to deteriorate again. And I think as we continue on this journey where our hospitals are only able to provide treatment to priority 1 and 2 patients, they will be seen. We're starting to see more data around this, and that's probably what, I don't know, Roxana, whether you were going to come in or whether that were an accident, but we are seeing more RTT data and waiting list information. So NHS England have worked with North of England commissioning support to try and put more clarity on referrals, so we can work with them on that. Diagnostic times is also impacted and it's deteriorating, and you know, it's winter anyway, so we see pressures, but a continued struggle in terms of A&E with the 4-hour target there. From a cancer perspective, a more positive position. However, just a note of caution that the data that was available when we were producing this report is to October, and therefore, while we've seen the length of waits and the number of people waiting over 2 weeks and then over 1 month and over 2 months reducing, you know, we've heard from colleagues earlier around the challenges in continuing to meet the targets around cancer, so that might just sort of drop the other way. And then the only other, so there's ambulances in there as well, and again struggling in terms of meeting the quickest targets, and then IAPT, where most of the targets are being achieved. The one that has been our challenge is around people entering treatment, and that continues to be the case. So I think this is about the number coming in, referred in, and being able to be accessed by the service. I still think, and from the messages from the service, this is about number of referrals coming forward not being sufficient to meet the target, as opposed to the service not having capacity because they've put new models in place in terms of digital and other things. So we've been expecting the increase. It's not quite there yet. Referral levels and access rates are the highest that they've been for a long while. So we must remember in this that the national expectation was a couple of years ago, the target were 15%, the access rate, and it's increased up towards 25%. So they're accepting many more cases than they have previously, but we're not yet at the 25%. That's all from a performance perspective.
Okay, so thank you for that, Jamie. Any questions for Jamie on performance? Mike Sims?
It's just a comment to really lead on from the cancer report earlier that it appears from the information we've had that most of the long waits on the cancer are related to patient choice rather than actual capacity at the hospital. Obviously, the number of referrals has gone down, but I think a lot of patients are now waiting for their vaccination or for the numbers to drop, COVID numbers to drop before they want their test doing. So a lot of these delays are actually related to patient choice, people choosing not to go rather than the actual lack of capacity and lack of function at the hospital.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, and I think always within this performance since the COVID pandemic, we have to recognise there is a COVID pandemic, and people need to think about the word pandemic. And we are in a position of national crisis, and the priority has to be mass vaccination so that all these services can be picked up, re-enabled. And I think our local services are doing extremely well in trying to get more of this work done. And I found the cancer report quite assuring in terms of efforts to be able to do this. There is patient choice, Mike, you're right. People are scared of going to hospital, and the vaccine will change that and give them confidence. So it comes back again, mass vaccination, first dose, as soon as possible, is probably the biggest intervention we can currently do to enable all these things, including phase 3 recovery. Okay, so if there are no further questions on that, thank you for that, Roxana and Jamie. Can we move on to, we have a series of committee reports and minutes, and the first ones are minutes of Finance and Performance Committee of the 5th of November and the 3rd of December. Those are both here for assurance, they've both been adopted. Happy to take any points of clarification if there are any. No? Okay, can we then move on to minutes of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee of the 24th of September and highlights of the 26th of November, please, Chris. Is there anything you'd like to draw to our attention?
Thank you, Chair. Quite rightly, you've already said that the meeting of the 24th of September have been adopted, and these minutes are here just for assurance. However, there is an update on the work that the Federation are doing to further assure the public who may access this meeting today. It was noted that during the current pandemic, all our practices in Barnsley remain open. It told us about a blue clinic which has been opened, which was to provide medical support to patients with COVID symptoms. And this service was being run from Oaks Park Medical Centre as part of their iHeart services. Up to the point this report was put together, reported that in actual fact they supported over 1,000 people, which was quite fantastic. After the presentation, I asked that James came along to Barnsley Patient Council just to deliver a summary of the excellent work that they've been doing up to that point. Pleased to tell you that that's already taking place. It went down well. As the member of the public are hopefully accessing this meeting today, I keep referring to Barnsley Patient Council. So I'm throwing out yet again an open invitation to anybody in Barnsley who wants to come along to Barnsley Patient Council. They are more than welcome, and I will welcome with open arms a younger cohort of people in Barnsley. You can access it through your own GP practice, or you can link into our website, and I'd look forward to even more people coming along. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Oh.
I think Nick's frozen.
Hello?
I think Nick's frozen. I think his kids must have all gone on the internet.
My whole screen froze. Did everybody get that?
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chris, well, Nick's dialing back in. Do you want to just take us through the last couple of things?
So we're on to item 22.3, minutes of the Quality and Patient Safety Committee. And if there's any questions, I will try and get someone to answer them. If not, we'll move on from that. So are there any questions in relation to that you want to put?
No.
Bearing in mind the report again is here for assurance.
Fine.
No? Okay, well I'll move on to 2.4, which is me, would you believe? The August minutes are here for assurance and have been adopted. The minutes are also here from the 3rd of December, and these are still to be adopted. This particular meeting gets very detailed, and you'll see if you're reading the minutes, which I hope you are, they are very detailed. There are 2 reports regarding our patient council, and again I'd urge you to read those, covering our care home realignment, and it also covers intermediate care, which Lucy has already covered. I was going to touch on changes to terms of reference, but we've already covered that by Richard during his assurance report. I want to take this opportunity actually to say a personal thanks to Kirsty Watnall and Emma Bradshaw for yet again for the 3rd year running that we have achieved. We've already known this, but I'm going to say it again, that we've achieved a green star for our NHS oversight framework in relation to patient work and our community and commissioning work. So Kirsty, thanks, and please pass on my thanks to your colleague Emma as well. There's also a big paper in there, which again I hope you've read, in relation to the people plan. Any questions? I'm more than happy to answer.
No.
Oh, okay. Right, there is a whole list now under item 23 of reports that were circulated in advance. Chris, would you like to just pick this up for me?
What, Chair, if it's okay with you, these are the minutes from the Health Executive meeting and the reports from Sir Andrew Cash. Right. I think they're really just for information, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone's got anything on the content. Yeah.
Okay, it was good that and important, I believe, that this information comes out early so we can all read it, rather than trying to catch up on the day before or whatever. So come back to Chris if there's any questions that anyone wants to put to him.
I think we've probably covered most of it on our agenda, Chair, to be fair.
Okay. Okay. So reflection on how the meeting has gone. Everybody happy with the quality of the papers that have been presented today?
Yep.
Thank you. We've gone through quite a bit today yet again, in terms of assurance, but does anybody need any extra reassurance? Jamie?
So it wasn't extra reassurance, Chris, so I'll let that come in, and then I was just trying to get in at the end, if that's all right.
Okay. And any training needs that are required? I hope all your training is up to date. Big smile on Millington's face here. So, Jamie, do you want to come in then?
Yeah, so it were only a quick one really, and just in the we talked about home working policy and the world that we're working in, and obviously nobody being in the office, so we're all on here virtually and don't see each other. So I just wanted to take the opportunity, and apologies guys, but there's a couple of people who have been with us as members of the public or joining who are not members of the committee, who are new CCG members of staff. So they don't know how we're going to do this. So hopefully they've done their hair and got some clothes on. But Emma Bates and Leanne Sparks, who joined the commissioning team just before Christmas and are with us. So I don't know if Emma and Leanne, you want to just put your cameras on and give a wave so that our governing body members know who you are.
Hello.
You have to say hello so that you pop up on the screens.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Have they not come up on my screen?
Can you see us?
No.
Jamie, are you there?
Sorry.
Are you there?
Yeah, we're here, Nick, but I don't know where you are.
Just something happened there. Don't go away.
Hi, Leanne. We can see you now.
Oh, hi, Chris.
Oh, we can't see you, Nick, but we can hear you.
Okay, turn camera on. Right.
On.
If you can hear me, have we finished the agenda?
Yeah, I've just introduced Nick. I was just introducing Emma Bates and Leanne Sparks, who are two new members of the commissioning team, because they've not met anybody because we've been in the environment that we have. So they've joined us for today's meeting as members of the public. So we just finished that.
Okay, so if we finish, just to say thank you to members of the public, thank you to Kay, governing body members, and we agreed to move to the private agenda. And I would also like to say how refreshing it is to see that Dr. Harben has adopted Boris Johnson's hairstyle.
That's the only way to get on.
And I think, are we going to have a 10-minute delay and restart, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're back here about, what is it now, 10 past,